I always knew I was the invisible scaffolding holding this family together while my sister Riley played the starring role. But standing in my parents' driveway, staring at a brand new silver sedan wrapped in a ridiculous red bow, I realized the true cost of my silence. They hadn't just helped her again, they had drained the only safety net I possessed. That car wasn't just a gift, it was my grandfather's promise to me, stolen and parked on wet asphalt. The alarm on my phone went off at 5:45 in the morning. A jarring electronic chime that sliced through the thin walls of my apartment. I did not hit snooze. Snoozing was a luxury for people who did not have to factor the cost of being 10 minutes late into their monthly budget. I rolled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold laminate floor, and immediately began the mental arithmetic that defined my existence. Rent was due in 4 days. The electric bill was higher than usual because the insulation in this building was non-existent. I had $68 in my checking account until Friday. I moved through the dark apartment with the muscle memory of someone who had lived in tight spaces for a decade. The kitchen was a narrow galley where two people could not stand abreast without touching shoulders. I started the coffee pot, a hand-me-down from my parents when they upgraded to a Keurig, and stared out the window at the gray pre-dawn light filtering over the rooftops of Brookridge. 32 years old. That was the number that kept circling my drain. At 32, my mother had owned a house, 2 cars, and had a 7-year-old child. At 32, I was an intake coordinator at the Brookridge Community Health Center, deciding whether to buy the good Greek yogurt or the generic store brand based on gas prices. I was the responsible one. That was the label pinned to my chest since I was 6 years old, and learned how to tie my own shoes while my sister screamed until my mother did it for her. I did everything right. I went to college. I took out the loans. I got the degree. I got the job. I paid my bills on time. I drove a 10-year-old hatchback that I maintained religiously, and yet, I was treading water while watching everyone else take speedboats to the horizon. By 7 in the morning, I was at my desk, drowning in paperwork. The clinic was already buzzing with the chaotic energy of the underinsured and the desperate. My job was to tell people what they could not afford, or to help them navigate a labyrinthine bureaucracy designed to make them give up. It was exhausting, soul-grinding work, but it was steady. Steady. That was my word. Ellie Hayes is steady. Ellie Hayes is reliable. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from my sister. Riley, can you believe this traffic? Gonna be late to the interview, LOL. I stared at the screen. Riley was 26. She lived in the finished basement of our parents' house in Maple Ridge, a comfortable suburb 20 minutes away. She did not pay rent. She did not pay for groceries. She bounced between part-time jobs, dog walking, barista work, a brief stint as a receptionist that ended because she just stopped showing up, and half-finished online certification courses that my parents happily funded. Good luck. I typed back. I did not point out that she was late because she likely left the house 10 minutes ago for a 20-minute drive. I put the phone down and returned to the intake form of a man who needed insulin but only had coverage for the generic brand that gave him hives. This was my life, managing the margins, but there was a light, a small, secret flicker of light that kept the darkness from swallowing me whole. I opened a separate tab on my work computer, incognito mode, and logged into the Brookridge Community Bank website. I did not do this often, maybe once a month, just to see the numbers. Ellie Inheritance Savings. The balance sat there, glowing in black pixels. $25,000. It was not a fortune to some people. To the wealthy developers gentrifying downtown Brookridge, it was a rounding error, but to me, it was oxygen. My grandfather, Walter Lane, had passed away 5 years ago. He was a hard man, quiet and stoic, a union pipe fitter who saved dimes in coffee cans. He saw something in me that he did not see in the rest of the family. He saw the struggle. He saw the way I quietly fixed things while Riley made noise. When he died, his will was specific. There were small amounts for everyone, but this account was set aside specifically for Eleanor Hayes. Use it for the big jump. He had told me once, sitting on his porch while he smoked a cigarette he wasn't supposed to have. Don't use it for groceries. Don't use it for rent. Use it to change your life. Grandma Margaret had protected it fiercely. She was the one who made sure the account was set up correctly. This is your safety net. She told me 1,000 times. This is your down payment on a condo. This is your tuition if you go back for your master's. This is yours. I stared at the number. $25,000. It was the only thing standing between me and the terrifying precipice of poverty. It was my future. I closed the tab, a small release of tension in my shoulders, and went back to work. After work, I drove straight to Westlake Hospice. The facility was nice enough, smelling of lemon polish and aggressive floral air freshener designed to mask the underlying scent of decline. Grandma Margaret had been there for 3 weeks, congestive heart failure. Her body was shutting down, a slow and breathless retreat from the world, but her mind was as sharp as a razor wire. I walked into room 304. She was sitting up, a clear tube running under her nose, the oxygen machine humming its rhythmic, mechanical breath in the corner. "Hey, Grandma," I said softly, dropping my bag on the visitor chair. She turned, her eyes brightening. There she is, the working girl. I sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. Her skin felt like parchment paper, dry and incredibly thin. I could see the map of her veins, blue rivers running over brittle bone. "How was the clinic?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Same as always." I said, "Too many people. Not enough doctors. How are you? Did you eat?" "I ate the pudding," she said with a wink. I hid the green beans under the napkin. "Do not tell the nurse." I laughed. It was a tired sound, but genuine. Margaret Lane was the only person in my family who actually saw me. My parents saw a function. Ellie the responsible. Ellie the distinct lack of drama. Riley saw a resource, but Margaret saw me. She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You look tired." "Ellie, I am tired. Grandma." She nodded, looking past me at the window where the sun was setting. "You know, when your grandfather and I were first married. During the recession in the 80s, we lost the house. Did I ever tell you that?" "Only about 100 times." I smiled. "And I will tell you 100 more," she said sternly. "We lost the house. We lived in a 2-room apartment above a bakery. It smelled like yeast all day long. But we never touched the savings we had for your dad's college. Never. I know. Money is a tool. Ellie," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "But it is also a test. It reveals who people are. It should never be used to punish the ones who try." She was worried. I could feel it. She knew my parents better than anyone. She knew my father. Her son Carl was a man who wanted to be the hero but lacked the discipline to save the money required to be one. She knew my mother, Denise, was driven by a desperate need for everything to look perfect on the surface, regardless of the rot underneath. And she knew about Riley. "Do not let them talk you out of your plans," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That money Walter left you, it is for you, not for the family pot. For you. It is safe, Grandma," I assured her, patting her hand. "It is sitting right in the bank. I checked it today." She closed her eyes, her breathing laboring slightly. "Good. You are the only one who knows the value of $1. Elle, you are the only one who will be okay." I stayed for another hour, reading her a chapter from a mystery novel she liked, until she drifted off to sleep. I kissed her forehead, which felt cool and dry, and walked out into the cool evening air. Dinner at my parents' house 2 days later was an exercise in patience. The house in Maple Ridge was a colonial with white siding and black shutters. It looked idyllic. The lawn was manicured, thanks to a landscaping service my dad complained about paying but refused to cancel. Inside, the house was cluttered with the debris of a middle-class life that was slowly fraying at the edges. We were sitting around the oak dining table. Me, Mom, Dad, and Riley. Riley was dramatic in her movements, talking with her hands, nearly knocking over her water glass. "I am just saying, it is a safety hazard," Riley exclaimed, dropping her fork onto her plate with a clatter. The brakes make this screeching sound every time I stop, and the heat only works if I'm driving over 50 miles per hour. It is a 10-year-old Corolla. Riley, I said, cutting a piece of roast chicken. It is going to have quirks. Quirks? She looked at me as if I had suggested she commute by unicycle. Ellie, it stalled at a red light yesterday. I was sitting there for 2 minutes with people honking at me. It was humiliating. I cannot show up to potential jobs in a car that might explode. It is not going to explode, Dad said, though he didn't look up from his mashed potatoes. I checked the oil last week. But Daddy? Riley whined, shifting her tone to that little girl frequency that I knew drilled straight into his guilt center. How am I supposed to start my real life if I cannot even get out of the driveway reliably? I have that interview next week, the one in the city. I need something safe. Mom reached over and patted Riley's arm. We know. Sweetie, we know it is hard. It is just not fair. Riley sulked. Ellie has a decent car. I paid for my car, I said, my voice tight. I drove a beater for 6 years, saved up, and bought the Honda. You know this? Riley rolled her eyes. You have a real job, Ellie. I'm trying to get there. I just need a little help to get started. That is all. Carl and Denise exchanged a look. It was a look I had seen 1,000 times. The how do we fix this look. The Riley is unhappy and that makes us uncomfortable look. We will figure something out, honey, Mom said, her voice soothing. Just focus on your interview. I felt a familiar knot of resentment tighten in my stomach. But I swallowed it down with the dry chicken. It was not my business. If they wanted to enable her, that was their financial funeral. After dinner, I helped clear the table. Riley, naturally, had vanished into the living room to text her friends, claiming a headache. I carried a stack of plates into the kitchen. Mom and Dad were standing by the sink. They didn't hear me come in. Timing is just terrible. Dad was whispering, We are tapped out on the cards. Denise, I know, Mom hissed back. But we cannot have her driving that death trap. What if she gets into an accident? We would never forgive ourselves. There is the other account. Dad said, his voice was low, hesitant. Carl, we cannot touch that, Mom said. But her protest sounded weak. It is not ours. It is family money. Denise. Walter meant for it to help the family, and she will never need it all anyway. She is doing fine. She is the steady one. We can put it back before anyone notices. I froze in the doorway. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She will never need it all anyway. I stepped into the room. Letting my shoes scuff loudly on the linoleum, the conversation died instantly. Dad spun around, grabbing a dish towel and starting to scrub a clean counter. Mom plastered a bright, brittle smile on her face. Ellie, Mom chirped. I did not see you there. Do you want some coffee? What were you talking about? I asked. I tried to keep my voice casual, but I could hear the tremor in it. Oh, nothing, Dad said, too quickly. Just bills. Boring stuff. You know how it is. Right, I said. I looked at them, really looked at them. They looked guilty, but they also looked practiced. They had been managing the narrative of our family for so long that I don't think they knew how to tell the truth anymore. I decided not to push it. I told myself I was being paranoid. They wouldn't. They couldn't. The account was in my name. Grandma had set it up. They had no legal right to it. I am going to head out, I said. I have an early shift. Don't be a stranger. Dad said, sounding relieved. I walked out past Riley, who was laughing at something on her phone, and got into my car. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the dark windows of the house I grew up in, wondering why I always felt like a guest there. The next day at the clinic, I was distracted. I kept making typos on the intake forms. Naomi, the other coordinator and my only real friend at work, rolled her chair over to my cubicle around noon. Okay, spill, she said, leaning on my desk. You have been staring at that insurance code for 20 minutes. I rubbed my temples. It is my family. It is always the family. Naomi sighed. What did Riley do now? She wants a new car, and I think my parents are trying to figure out how to buy it for her. So, let them, not your money, not your problem. I lowered my voice. I think they were talking about using my inheritance. Naomi's eyebrows shot up. The grandpa money? The nest egg? I nodded. I overheard them whispering. Dad said she is doing fine and we can put it back. Naomi frowned, her expression turning serious. Ellie, is your name the only one on that account? Yes. I think so. Grandma set it up. It is the Ellie Inheritance Savings. Did you ever sign a power of attorney? Maybe when you were younger? Or when you were setting up your main accounts? I do not know. I stammered. I bank at the same place they do. Brookridge Community. We have had accounts there since I was a kid. Dad helped me set up my checking account when I was 18. Naomi tapped her pen against her chin. You need to check that. Parents do weird things when they think they are saving their kids. And if they think you are fine and Riley is drowning, they will rationalize anything. It stuck with me. They will rationalize anything. I spent the rest of the week in a state of low-level anxiety. I didn't check the account. I was afraid to. If I checked and it was fine, I was a paranoid daughter who didn't trust her parents. If I checked and it wasn't fine, I didn't know what I would do. So I waited. I let the days pass. 7 days later, on a Tuesday evening, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off some mail that had come to my apartment by mistake, a recurring issue since I had lived there briefly after college. I turned onto the street and saw it from 3 houses away. There was a car in the driveway. It wasn't the rusted Corolla. It was a brand new silver sedan. The sun caught the metallic paint, making it gleam like a jewel. There was a massive red bow on the hood, the kind you see in commercials and assume no one actually buys in real life. My stomach dropped through the floor. I parked my car on the street because the driveway was full. I walked up the path, my legs feeling like they were moving through wet concrete. Riley was standing by the driver's side door, shrieking. She was holding a set of keys, jumping up and down. Mom was taking photos with her phone. Beaming like she had just won the lottery, Dad was standing with his hands in his pockets, rocking back and forth on his heels, a look of immense satisfaction on his face. "Oh my God!" Riley screamed when she saw me. "Ellie, look, look!" She pointed at the car. "It is a 2026. It has heated seats. It has a backup camera." I stopped at the edge of the driveway. "It is nice, Riley." Mom lowered her phone, her face flushed with happiness. "We just wanted her to be safe, Ellie. We couldn't sleep thinking about her in that old clunker." Dad walked over and clapped a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy. We wanted to surprise her. She finally has a safe car to start her life. I looked at the car. It had to cost $30,000, maybe more. My parents didn't have $30,000. They had credit card debt and a second mortgage. "Where did you get the money?" I asked. My voice was quiet, barely audible over Riley's excitement. Dad laughed, a booming, jovial sound that felt like a slap. "Well, your grandpa's money finally did something useful." The world stopped, the sound of the wind in the trees, Riley's squealing, the distant bark of a dog. It all just ceased. I looked at my father. He was smiling. He didn't even look ashamed. He looked proud. He looked like a man who had solved a problem. I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned around without saying a word and walked back to my car. "Ellie?" Mom called out. "Ellie, where are you going? Do you want to see the interior?" I got into my car, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I drove. I didn't know where I was going. Just away. I pulled into the parking lot of a closed gas station 2 miles down the road. I put the car in park and grabbed my phone. My fingers fumbled with the app icon, Brookridge Community Bank. Face ID recognized me. The little loading circle spun. It felt like it spun for an hour. Then the dashboard loaded. Checking. $68.42. Savings. $1,200. Ellie Inheritance. Savings. $142.50. I stared at the number, $142. It was gone. I tapped the account history. There was one transaction, dated 3 days ago. Withdrawal. Cashier's check 88392. $24,857.50. I clicked on the transaction details. There was an image of the withdrawal slip. I zoomed in on the signature line. It said Eleanor Hayes, but it wasn't my signature. The loops were too wide. The H was slanted wrong. It was a forgery, a clumsy, arrogant forgery. And below it, in the authorization box, was a note. Per power of attorney on file. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. A sound tore out of my throat. Half sob, half scream. I felt nauseous. A physical sickness roiling in my gut. They stole it. They didn't borrow it. They didn't ask. They walked into a bank, pretended to be me, or used some document I didn't know existed, and they drained my future to buy a toy for my sister. I sat there for 10 minutes, breathing until the black spots in my vision cleared. Then I put the car in gear. I was not going home to cry. I was going back to Maple Ridge. I didn't knock. I used my key and walked straight into the living room. They were all there. Riley was holding the owner's manual, reading out loud about the Bluetooth connectivity. Mom and Dad were sitting on the couch, drinking wine, celebrating. The front door slammed behind me. They jumped. Riley looked up, eyes wide. "Ellie?" Dad said, frowning. "What is wrong with you? You stormed off like you stole my money." The words hung in the air, sharp and jagged. Mom put her wine glass down. "Ellie, lower your voice. The neighbors. I do not care about the neighbors," I yelled. I stepped further into the room. My hands balled into fists at my sides. "I just checked my account. The inheritance account. It is empty. You took it." Riley looked between us, confused. "What? What is she talking about?" Dad stood up, his face hardening. He adopted the stance he always used when he wanted to intimidate us, chest out, voice deepening. "We did not steal anything. Eleanor, we made a family decision." "A family decision?" I laughed, and it sounded hysterical. I was not part of the decision. It was my money. Grandpa left it to me. It was family money, Dad insisted, stepping toward me. It was sitting there doing nothing. You were just letting it rot in a low-interest account. Riley needed a car. She needed help. So you took my $25,000? Without asking me? We borrowed it. Mom interjected, standing up to join Dad. She reached out as if to touch me, but I took a step back. "Ellie, honey, listen, we fully intend to pay it back. Eventually, when Dad gets his bonus, or when the market turns. You forged my signature," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "I saw the slip. You signed my name." Dad waved a hand dismissively. "That was just paperwork. The bank knows us. They know we are all on the same team." "I am not on your team," I screamed. Riley stood up, throwing the manual on the floor. "God, Ellie, why do you have to be so selfish?" I whipped my head toward her. "Selfish?" "Yes, selfish. You have a job. You have a car. You have everything figured out. I have been struggling for years. And the one time something good happens for me, you have to come in here and make it about you." I looked at her. I looked at this 26-year-old woman who had never been told no in her life. It was my money. Riley, it was for my house. It was for my grad school. "You are fine," Dad shouted. "Look at you. You are doing fine. Why are you so greedy? Your sister is finally safe on the road, and all you care about is a number in a bank account. I am disappointed in you." Ellie, the gaslighting was so absolute, so complete, that for a second, I faltered. I felt that old, ingrained programming kicking in, the program that said I was the bad one for making waves, that my needs were secondary to the family's comfort. But then I thought of Margaret. I thought of her hand in mine. It is also a test. It reveals who people are. I looked at my parents. I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't just messy. They weren't just loving but misguided. They were thieves, and they felt entitled to be thieves because they had decided that my sacrifice was their birthright. I am not the one who should be disappointed, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet. I turned to the door. Ellie, wait. Mom cried out. Do not leave like this. Let's sit down. We can talk about a repayment plan. I did not stop. I did not look back. I walked out of the house, past the shining silver car that was bought with my grandfather's love and my grandmother's promise. I got into my Honda, reversed out of the driveway, and drove away. My phone started buzzing immediately. Mom, Dad, Riley. I ignored them all. I drove through the blurred lights of the suburbs, tears finally spilling over my cheeks, hot and angry. I felt hollowed out. I felt like the foundation of my life had been sledgehammered. But underneath the grief, underneath the shock, something else was starting to harden. They thought I was the steady one. They thought I was the one who would just take it, fix it, and move on. They thought I would understand. They were wrong. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and merged onto the highway. I wasn't going home. I was going to the only place where the truth still mattered. I was going back to the hospice. I needed to talk to Grandma. The ceiling of my bedroom had a water stain shaped like a jagged continent. I knew every contour of it. I knew it because for 3 nights in a row, I had stared at it until the sun came up, my eyes gritty and burning, my mind trapped in a loop of replay and regret. I lay in the tangle of my sheets, my phone glowing in the dark next to my pillow. It was 3 a.m. I picked it up, unlocking the screen to scroll through the message history with Grandma Margaret. I needed proof. I needed to know that I had not invented the promise of that money. November 14th, 2023. Don't worry about the tuition increase. Elle, that is what your nest egg is for. When you are ready. August 2nd, 2024. Saw a condo listing on 4th Street. Cute balcony. Maybe one day. The fund is growing. March 10th, 2025. Just remember, Walter left that for you. Not for the house roof. Not for your dad's bad investments. For you. I read them over and over, mouthing the words in the silence of my apartment. For you. But in the echoing chamber of my insomnia, my parents' voices were louder. You are doing fine. It is a family decision. Why are you so selfish? They had planted a seed of doubt that was rapidly blooming into a choking vine. Was I selfish? I had a job. I paid my rent. I wasn't rich. But I wasn't drowning like Riley always claimed to be. Maybe they were right. Maybe holding on to $25,000 while my sister drove a dangerous car was a form of greed. Then I would remember the signature, Eleanor Hayes, written in my father's looping hand. And the anger would return, hot and suffocating, making my heart hammer against my ribs until I had to sit up and gasp for air. It wasn't the money, it was the theft. It was the absolute certainty that they viewed my autonomy as a resource they could harvest whenever Riley needed bailing out. I needed to see Margaret. I went to Westlake Hospice straight after a shift where I felt like a ghost haunting my own desk. When I walked into her room, Margaret was sitting in the armchair by the window, a blanket tucked around her knees. The afternoon light washed her in pale gray, highlighting the fragility of her collarbones. She looked smaller than she had 3 days ago. Hi, Grandma, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was made of plaster. I brought you some magazines. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes, usually bright with a fierce intelligence, were clouded with fatigue. But as they locked onto mine, they sharpened. You look terrible. Eleanor, she said. I let out a short, dry laugh. Thanks. I love the honesty. I pulled the visitor chair close to her knees and sat down. I tried to talk about the weather. I tried to talk about the new intake software at the clinic. I tried to talk about anything that wasn't the screaming void in my bank account. Margaret listened for 5 minutes, her gaze never leaving my face. Then, she reached out and placed her hand over mine. It was light as a dried leaf. Stop it, she said. Stop what? Stop lying to me. I am dying. Ellie, I am not stupid. Something has happened. Tell me. I opened my mouth to deny it, to protect her from the stress. But the dam broke, the exhaustion, the betrayal. the gaslighting. It all surged up, and I slumped forward, resting my forehead on the edge of her mattress. They took it. I whispered. Took what? Margaret's voice was sharp. The money, the inheritance, the account is empty. Grandma. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the rhythmic whoosh click of the oxygen concentrator. When I looked up, Margaret's face had transformed. The frailty was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were blazing. Who? She demanded. Mom and Dad. They bought Riley a car, a brand new sedan. They said Riley needed it. They said I was doing fine and I would understand. Margaret gripped my hand so hard her knuckles turned white. She pulled herself forward in the chair, her breath hitching. A car? She spat the word out like a curse. They used Walter's life savings to buy a depreciating asset for that girl? I nodded, tears finally spilling over. I found out yesterday. The account has a balance of $140. Margaret closed her eyes, inhaling deeply through her nose, fighting for control. When she opened them again, the anger had settled into a steely resolve. How did they access it? Ellie, that account was in your name, designated beneficiary. I don't know. I wiped my face. The bank said it was a withdrawal slip. Did you sign anything? She asked, her voice intense. Ellie, did you ever sign a joint access form? Did you give them a passkey? No, I said, I never signed anything, but what? I never asked to see the paperwork either. I admitted, shame flooding my face. When Grandpa died, I was so overwhelmed. Dad said he would handle the transfer. He said he would set it up exactly how you wanted. I trusted him. I thought he was looking out for me. Margaret let out a low sound of pain. Not physical, but emotional. She leaned back, shaking her head. They used your trust as a weapon, she said quietly. And they used my illness as a distraction. They knew I was too sick to check the statements, and they knew you were too loyal to question them. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for me. They have crossed a line. Ellie, this isn't just favoritism. This is theft. I know, I said, but they keep saying it is family money. They make me feel like I'm crazy for being upset. You are not crazy, Margaret said firmly. You are the victim of a crime committed by people who claim to love you. She squeezed my hand one last time, then released it. She looked toward the small bedside table where her glasses and a pitcher of water sat. Go home. Ellie, she said abruptly. What? I blinked. I just got here. Go home. I am tired. I need to rest. But Grandma, please, Ellie. She turned her face toward the window, effectively dismissing me. I need to sleep. Come back in a few days. I felt a sting of rejection, but I stood up. I kissed her cheek. Her skin felt feverish, and walked out. I didn't understand why she was pushing me away, but I didn't have the energy to fight her. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't learn until later, was that Margaret wasn't sleeping. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, she was moving. It took her 5 minutes to maneuver her body from the chair to the bedside table. Every movement a battle against gravity and failing lungs. She opened the drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of puzzle books, was a blue plastic folder. She had kept it there since she was admitted. Hidden in plain sight. She pulled it out, her hands trembling. Inside were copies. She was a woman of the paper generation. She believed in hard copies. There was the original deed of gift from my grandfather. There was her will. And there was a business card, cream-colored and bent at the corner. Nolan Price, attorney at law. Harborview Legal Group. She laid the documents out on the bedspread. She stared at them. She stared at the phone on the nightstand. She loved her son. Carl was her baby. She remembered teaching him to walk, remembered him crying when he scraped his knee, but she also remembered the man he had become, weak, pliable, and willing to cannibalize one child to pacify the other. She picked up the business card. She didn't call yet. She just held it. breathing the supplemental oxygen, letting the reality of what she had to do settle into her bones like lead. I went home and did the one thing I had been too afraid to do. I called the bank, I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open, my phone on speaker. The hold music was a tinny, cheerful jazz loop that made me want to scream. Finally, a voice clicked on. Brookridge Community Bank. This is Sarah. How can I help you? Hi, I said, my voice shaking. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I need to ask about a transaction on my savings account, the one ending in 442. One moment. Ms. Hayes, let me verify your identity. We went through the security questions. Mother's maiden name. First pet. Okay, I have the account up. Sarah said, I see the transaction you're referring to. The cashier's check issued on Tuesday? Yes. I said, I did not make that withdrawal. There was a pause on the line. The clicking of a keyboard stopped. I see, Sarah said, her tone shifting from professional cheer to cautious neutrality. The withdrawal slip has a signature. Ms. Hayes, it is not my signature, I said, gripping the edge of the table. I see. The notes here indicate the transaction was authorized in branch. It references a power of attorney document on file. Power of attorney? I frowned. I never gave anyone power of attorney. Sarah hesitated. I cannot give you full legal details over the phone, Ms. Hayes, but the system notes a standing power of attorney document dated 4 years ago. It lists 2 agents. One is a Margaret Lane. Grandma. That made sense. If something happened to me, I wanted her to have access. And the other? I asked. The other agent listed is Carl Hayes. The heir left the room. Carl? My father? Yes, ma'am. But I never signed that. I stammered. I remember signing one for my grandmother. But not him. Ms. Hayes, Sarah said gently. If you are disputing the validity of the authorization, this becomes a fraud matter. We take that very seriously. But I strongly suggest you come into the branch. We can pull the original document from the archives so you can see it. Okay, thank you. I hung up. I sat in the silence, feeling cold. They hadn't just forged a withdrawal slip. They had forged a legal document years ago, or, more likely, they had slipped a piece of paper in front of me when I was 28, buried in a stack of student loan forms or tax documents, and said, "Sign here. L, just standard family stuff." And I had signed it. I had signed my own robbery warrant because I thought my parents were the good guys. The next day at the clinic was a disaster. I was processing a routine intake for a young mother with 2 kids. I asked her for her insurance card, scanned it, and then stared at the screen. The numbers blurred. I couldn't focus. I typed the wrong birth date 3 times. "Ma'am?" the woman asked gently. "Are you okay?" I looked up. She looked tired, worn down by the system. Yet she was asking me if I was okay. "I'm sorry," I mumbled. "Just a headache." I finished the form, handed her the clipboard, and then walked straight into the supply closet. I sat down on a box of latex gloves and put my head between my knees. I felt humiliated. I was the competent one. I was the one who handled crises. And here I was, hiding among the cleaning supplies because my parents had decided I didn't matter. The door opened. A slice of light cut across the floor. "Ellie?" It was Naomi. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She didn't say anything, just sat down on a step stool next to me. They used a power of attorney. I said, my voice thick with tears, "They have had it for 4 years. Naomi let out a low whistle. "That is premeditated. Elle, that is not an accident. I feel so stupid," I whispered. "Who signs things without reading them? People who trust their parents." Naomi said firmly, "Do not blame the victim." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tissue. "You know what you have to do, right?" I wiped my nose. "I don't know if I can." "You have to." Naomi said, "This isn't about the money anymore. It is about the fact that they will do it again. If you don't draw a line, they will take everything. Your credit, your future, everything. You need to talk to a lawyer." "A lawyer," I repeated. "Sue my own parents. Protect yourself from people who are stealing from you, she corrected. Family or not. My phone buzzed that afternoon. A group text. Mom. Family brunch this Sunday. Dad is making his famous waffles. We need to talk calmly and move past this silliness. 10 a.m. Love you. Dad. Be there. L. Let's fix this. Riley. Please come. I want to take you for a ride in the Silver Bullet. She had named the car. The Silver Bullet. I wanted to throw up. But I also wanted to look them in the eye one more time. I wanted to see if there was any remorse, any crack in the facade. I drove to Maple Ridge on Sunday morning. The silver sedan was parked in the driveway, gleaming mockingly. Inside, the house smelled of bacon and coffee. It was a perfect tableau of suburban Sunday bliss. Mom was setting the table. Dad was at the stove. Riley was scrolling on her phone. Hey, Riley chirped when I walked in. She looked happy, unburdened. Sit down. Sit down, Dad said, gesturing with a spatula. Coffee is fresh. I sat. I didn't take any coffee. So, Mom said, clasping her hands, we are so glad you came. We hate it when there is tension. There is tension because you took $25,000 from me. I said flatly. Dad sighed, flipping a waffle onto a plate. Ellie, we have been over this. We borrowed it. We are going to move some money around. Move what money? I asked. You don't have $25,000 to move. We have assets, Dad said vaguely, and once Riley gets this job in the city, which she will, thanks to the car, she can start chipping in. Riley looked up, mouth full of bacon. Yeah, totally. I mean, once I am settled, but entry-level pays nothing, so it might take a while. She turned to me, eyes bright. But seriously, Elle, you have to drive it. It is so smooth. Here. She reached into her pocket and tossed her keys across the table. They landed on my placemat with a heavy clatter. You can borrow it whenever you want, she said generously. If your Honda breaks down or something, we can share. I stared at the keys. The fob was shiny and new. You want me to borrow the car I paid for? I asked quietly. Riley frowned. You didn't pay for it. Mom and Dad did. Using the grandpa money, which, by the way, was just sitting there. I looked at my parents. They were eating, avoiding my gaze. They hadn't told her. They hadn't even told her it was my money specifically. They had framed it as grandpa money, a nebulous family pot. I picked up the keys. They felt cold. I don't want to drive it. Riley. I tossed them back. I threw them harder than I intended. They skidded across the table and hit her water glass. Hey, Riley snapped. Watch it. Ellie, that is enough, Dad barked, slamming his fork down. We are trying to have a nice meal. You committed fraud. Dad, I said, I spoke to the bank. You used a power of attorney I never knowingly signed. Dad's face turned a mottled red. That document is legal. You signed it before you moved out. It was for emergencies. Is Riley wanting heated seats an emergency? I demanded. It was a family emergency, Dad shouted. His voice echoed off the kitchen walls. She was stuck. She couldn't move forward. You are the older sister. You are supposed to help. But since you wouldn't offer, we had to do what was necessary as parents. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. I am not eating this, I said. And I am not accepting this. I walked to the door. If you walk out now. Ellie, Mom called out, her voice trembling. Do not expect us to help you when you need it. I turned back to look at them. The threat was so empty it was pathetic. You have never helped me. Mom, I have been helping myself. And now, I have been helping you. I left. That evening, I was back in my apartment, staring at the wall. My phone rang. It was Dad. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. What? I said. You upset your mother, he said. His voice was cold, stripped of the jovial mask. She has been crying all afternoon. She should be crying. I said, she stole from her daughter. Listen to me, Eleanor, he said. Stop using words like steal and fraud. You are threatening the family. You are threatening our stability. I am consulting a lawyer. Dad, I said. The words came out before I planned them. There was a silence on the other end. A heavy, dangerous silence. You wouldn't, he said. Watch me. If you do that, he hissed, if you drag strangers into our business, you will kill your grandmother. Do you hear me? Margaret is hanging by a thread. If she finds out you are suing us, the stress will kill her, and that will be on you. The line went dead. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. He had played his final card. He had used Margaret as a human shield. I felt trapped. I couldn't let them get away with this. But could I risk hurting Grandma? At Westlake Hospice, the sun had gone down. The halls were quiet. The night shift nurses moving in soft-soled shoes. Margaret Lane lay in her bed. She was not sleeping. She was replaying the conversation she had had an hour ago with Maria. The night nurse. Maria. Margaret had asked, "Do you see this often? Families fighting over money?" "Every day, honey," Maria had said, smoothing Margaret's sheets. "Money brings out the truth. The vultures come circling, or the saints show their faces. But usually, it's the vultures." Margaret stared at the ceiling. She thought about Ellie. She thought about the exhaustion in her granddaughter's eyes. The way she had apologized for being robbed. Ellie would never fight back. Not really. She was too good. She loved too much. She would let Carl and Denise bully her into silence because she didn't want to cause pain. Margaret realized then that she was the only one who could fire the cannon. She was the only one with nothing left to lose. She reached out, her hand shaking violently, and fumbled for the phone. She picked up the handset. She didn't need to look up the number. She had memorized it 3 years ago when she wrote the contingency clause. She dialed. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello?" A man's voice, unexpected for a Sunday night, but Nolan Price was that kind of lawyer. "Nolan," Margaret rasped. Her voice was weak, but the steel was back in her spine. "Margaret, is everything all right?" "No," she said. "It is Margaret Lane. We need to activate the instructions I left you." There was a pause, the sound of a chair shifting. "I have the file right here." "Margaret, are you sure?" "I am sure," she said. She looked at the photo of Ellie on her bedside table. A graduation picture. Ellie smiling, hopeful, unaware of how hard the world was about to be. "My granddaughter Ellie is being robbed," Margaret said into the dark, "and I will not let them get away with it." The morning sun that filtered through the blinds of room 304 at Westlake Hospice was pale and watery, offering little warmth against the sterile chill of the facility. Margaret Lane sat propped up against 3 pillows. Her breathing labored, but her eyes fixed on the door. At 9 o'clock sharp, the door opened. Nolan Price entered. He was a man of 60, dressed in a charcoal suit that had seen better decades but was maintained with meticulous care. He carried a leather briefcase that smelled of old paper and tobacco. He had been Margaret's attorney for 20 years, handling everything from the sale of her house to the drafting of her will. He knew the look of a client who was making their final arrangements. He had seen it too many times. "Good morning, Margaret," Nolan said, his voice a low rumble. He placed his hat on the empty visitor chair and approached the bed. Taking her hand gently, "Nolan," Margaret wheezed, "thank you for coming. I came as soon as I got your message. You said it was urgent. It is." Margaret gestured to the pitcher of water. Nolan poured her a glass and held the straw to her lips. She took a small sip, gathering her strength. "My son," she began, the words coming out slow and deliberate. "Carl, he has done something I cannot forgive." Nolan pulled a notepad from his briefcase. He clicked his pen. "Tell me." He took Ellie's money. "Nolan, the fund Walter left, the nest egg." He drained it. Nolan stopped writing. He looked up over his reading glasses. "The designated savings account? The one we specifically carved out in the deed of gift 5 years ago?" Margaret nodded. "He used it to buy a car. For Riley." Nolan's expression tightened. He did not look surprised, merely disappointed. Lawyers like Nolan Price knew that grief often brought out the worst in families. But theft before the body was even cold. or in this case, before the matriarch had even passed, was a special kind of low. How did he access it? Nolan asked. Eleanor is the sole beneficiary. He used a power of attorney, Margaret said, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and exhaustion. Ellie says she never signed one for him. The bank told her it was a standing document. Nolan made a note, pressing the pen hard into the paper, if he used a document that was forged, or if he used a medical power of attorney to conduct financial transactions, which happens more often than you would think with sloppy bank tellers. That is fraud. Margaret, that is actionable. I know, she whispered. She reached for the blue folder on her nightstand. Nolan took it from her. I want you to stop him. Nolan, I want you to freeze everything. The estate accounts, the joint holdings, everything. If Carl thinks he can treat the family money like his personal piggy bank, I want to show him exactly how locked that bank can be. Nolan reviewed the papers in the folder. He nodded slowly. I can file for an emergency freeze on the estate assets based on suspected mismanagement. I can also request a full audit of the transaction from Brookridge Community Bank regarding Eleanor's account. Do it, Margaret said. There is one more thing, Nolan said, his tone cautious. If we go down this road, Margaret, we are effectively accusing your son of financial misconduct. This could lead to criminal inquiries. It will certainly destroy his standing as executor of your will. Margaret looked at the wall, at a small framed photo of the whole family from 10 years ago. Everyone was smiling. It was a lie even then. Change it, she said. I beg your pardon? Change the executor. Remove Carl. I want Ellie. Nolan paused. Eleanor is young. This is going to be a messy probate process. She is the only one who is honest, Margaret said firmly. She is the only one who will not steal. Write it up, Nolan, and put a clause in there. If they fight her, they lose their share. Nolan looked at the frail woman in the bed. He saw the iron will that had carried her through the Great Recession and the loss of her husband. If anyone is going to feel consequences this time, Margaret said, closing her eyes, it won't be Ellie. My phone rang at 11 in the morning. I was at my desk at the clinic, trying to focus on a spreadsheet of vaccination codes, but the numbers kept swimming before my eyes. I picked it up without looking at the ID. This is Ellie. Ms. Hayes? This is the receptionist at Harborview Legal Group. I am calling on behalf of Nolan Price. My heart hammered against my ribs. Harborview, that was Grandma's firm. Had she died? Was this the call? Is it my grandmother? I asked, my voice catching in my throat. Oh, no. Ms. Hayes. The receptionist said quickly, I apologize. Ms. Lane is still with us. Mr. Price would like to request a meeting with you today regarding your grandmother's estate and a matter concerning your designated inheritance. The relief washed over me, followed instantly by a wave of nausea. A matter concerning your designated inheritance. Can I come in during my lunch break? I asked. At 1 o'clock? That would be perfect. We will see you then. I hung up and stared at the phone. My hands were shaking. I felt like I was standing on a cliff edge, and the wind was picking up. Naomi rolled her chair around the partition. You look like you're about to pass out. Who was that? My grandma's lawyer. I whispered. He wants to see me. Naomi didn't hesitate. Grab your purse. I am driving you. I can drive, I said weakly. No, you can't, she said, standing up and grabbing her keys. You are shaking, and if this is what I think it is, you are going to need a witness, or at least a getaway driver. Come on. The offices of Harborview Legal Group were in a brick building downtown that smelled of lemon polish and serious decisions. Naomi waited in the lobby, thumbing through an old magazine, while I was ushered into Nolan Price's office. It was a room lined with dark wood bookshelves. Nolan stood up from behind a massive mahogany desk. He looked like a grandfather from a TV show, stern but trustworthy. Ms. Hayes, he said, shaking my hand. Thank you for coming so quickly. Please, sit. I sat in a leather chair that felt too big for me. What is this about? Mr. Price? Did Grandma send you? She did, Nolan said. He opened a file on his desk. She told me about the car and the bank account. I looked down at my lap. I felt a flush of shame. I shouldn't have burdened her. She is sick. She is sick. Nolan agreed, but she is also furious, and she has instructed me to look into this matter. He pulled a sheet of paper from the file. I have already made a preliminary inquiry with the compliance department at Brookridge Community Bank. We have a contact there. And? Nolan leaned forward, clasping his hands. Ms. Hayes, the withdrawal of $24,857 was processed last Tuesday. The authorization used was a photocopy of a power of attorney document dated 4 years ago. I shook my head. I didn't sign it. I know I didn't. Nolan nodded. We pulled the original scan. The document in question is a medical power of attorney. It was drafted when your grandmother had her first heart scare. It appoints Margaret Lane as your agent for health decisions, with your father, Carl, as a secondary agent. I frowned. Medical? Yes. It grants the agent the right to make medical decisions if you are incapacitated. It does not, under any circumstances, grant financial authority. My mouth fell open. You mean, they used a medical form to access my bank account? Nolan's face was grim. It appears the teller at the branch did not scrutinize the document closely. They saw power of attorney and Carl Hayes and processed the check. That is a massive compliance failure on the bank's part. But it also means your parents presented a document they knew, or should have known, was invalid for this purpose. He let that sink in. This is not a misunderstanding. Ellie, he said gently, this is conversion of funds. In layman's terms, it is theft. I felt cold. I had thought they bullied me. I had thought they used a loophole, but they had just lied. They had walked into a bank and lied. What? What happens now? I asked. Nolan leaned back. Margaret has instructed me to freeze all estate accounts that your father currently has access to. She is also revising her will as we speak. But regarding your money, you have options. Options? We can demand the bank restore the funds immediately due to their error. They will then go after your parents to recoup the loss. Or we can file a civil complaint against your parents directly. Or, if the bank reports this as internal fraud, which they might, to cover their own liability, it could be referred to the district attorney. I stared at him. The district attorney, criminal charges. I don't want them to go to jail. I whispered, they are my parents. I understand, Nolan said, and that is why we are going to try to handle this quietly first. But you need to understand the gravity of what they did. They did not just borrow money. They committed a crime against you. He pushed a notepad toward me. I need you to go home and find everything, every email, every text, every document you have ever received from them about money. We need to build a wall of evidence so high that they have no choice but to settle this on our terms. I spent that night tearing my apartment apart. I emptied the filing cabinet I kept in the closet. I dumped out a shoebox of old tax returns. I scrolled through 6 years of emails. My bedroom looked like a whirlwind had hit it. Papers were scattered everywhere. I was looking for proof. Proof that the money was mine. Proof that they knew it. Around midnight, I found it. It was buried in a folder labeled Grandpa. It was an email from my dad, dated 3 months after Walter died. The subject line was, Family Financial Update, Layout. I opened the email on my laptop. Hey, Elle. The text read, just keeping everyone in the loop on how we are structuring Dad's estate. Attached is the breakdown. We are keeping it all under one umbrella for tax purposes, but everything is tracked. I clicked the attachment. It was a PDF. I scrolled down. Page 1 was the house. Page 2 was the general savings. Page 3, account 442. Designated beneficiary, Eleanor Hayes. Only, purpose, education/housing/future investment. Note, do not merge with household funds. I stared at the screen. Do not merge with household funds. He had written that. My father had written that note. He knew. He had always known. The whole speech about family money and shared resources. was a lie he had constructed to justify taking it when he needed it. I printed the document. I printed it 3 times. I sat on the floor, holding the warm paper. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. The sadness had burned off, leaving something harder, colder. I wasn't the selfish daughter. I wasn't the greedy sister. I was the mark. The next morning, the letter from Harborview Legal Group arrived at the house in Maple Ridge. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it later from Riley, who left me a voicemail that was 5 minutes of hysterical sobbing. Here is how I imagine it happened. The mail carrier dropped the thick envelope through the slot. Dad picked it up, expecting a bill or a flyer. He saw the return address, Harborview Legal Group. He probably thought it was an update on Margaret. He probably opened it in the kitchen, sipping his coffee, expecting bad news about his mother's health. Instead, he read a formal notice of inquiry regarding the unauthorized withdrawal of funds from account 442. He read that the estate accounts were being temporarily frozen pending an investigation into executor misconduct. He read a demand for a meeting to discuss restitution. I imagined the color draining from his face. I imagined Mom walking in, asking what was wrong, and him handing her the letter without a word. Then, the panic. Mom would have started crying immediately. "We can just explain," she would have said. "We will tell Nolan it was a misunderstanding. We will tell him Ellie said it was okay." But Dad would have known better. Dad knew Nolan Price. Nolan didn't care about family understandings. Nolan cared about paper, and Dad knew the paper he had used was a lie. Then, the anger. He called me at 10 o'clock. I let it go to voicemail. He texted, "What have you done? You are letting a stranger attack your parents? Call me immediately." Then Mom texted, "Ellie, please, Dad is talking about lawyers. This is getting out of hand. We just wanted to help Riley. Why are you doing this?" I didn't reply. I forwarded the text to Nolan. Riley caught me as I was leaving work. She was waiting by my car in the parking lot. The silver sedan was parked right behind my Honda, blocking me in. She was wearing her waitress uniform, and her face was blotchy from crying. "You!" she screamed as soon as she saw me. I stopped. People in the parking lot turned to look. "Move your car." "Riley," I said calmly. "You are ruining everything," she shrieked, stomping her foot. "Dad says they might take the car. He says the lawyer wants to put a lien on it. It was bought with stolen money." "Riley, it was a gift." She threw her hands up. "I didn't steal anything. I just accepted a gift from Mom and Dad. Why are you punishing me?" I walked up to her. I was 6 years older, but I had always felt smaller than her. She took up so much space with her emotions. Today, though, I felt tall. "I am not punishing you," I said. "I am getting my money back." "But I need this car," she wailed. "I have a life. Ellie, I finally have a chance to be someone. Why can't you just let it go? You have a job. You are boring and stable and you don't need it." Boring and stable. That was how she saw me. That was how they all saw me. A resource to be mined. A predictable bank account to be raided so the star of the show could shine. "You are 26 years old," I said. "You are an adult. If you want a car, buy one. But you are not driving my inheritance." I got into my Honda. "Move the car, Riley, or I will call the police and tell them you are blocking me in with a stolen vehicle." She stared at me, mouth agape. She had never heard me speak like that. She got into the silver sedan, slammed the door, and reversed aggressively, tires screeching. She sped out of the lot, narrowly missing a speed bump. I watched her go. I felt a pang of guilt. Old habits die hard. But I squashed it. Naomi was right. They would take everything if I didn't stop them. Back at Westlake Hospice, the atmosphere was heavy. Margaret had asked for the social worker, a kind woman named Brenda with a soft voice and a notary stamp. "I need to make a statement," Margaret told her. "A video statement." Brenda set up a small tablet on the rolling table. "Is this for the family?" she asked. "It is for the court," Margaret said, "just in case." Brenda hit record. The red light blinked. Margaret looked into the lens. She had brushed her hair. She had put on lipstick. She looked like the matriarch she was, even with the oxygen tube taped to her cheek. "My name is Margaret Lane," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I am of sound mind. I am making this recording to clarify my intentions regarding the estate of my late husband, Walter Lane." She took a breath. The funds in the account ending in 442 were designated solely for my granddaughter, Eleanor Hayes. They were never intended to be shared, pooled, or borrowed. My son, Carl Hayes, knows this. He has always known this. She looked directly into the camera, as if she were looking into Carl's eyes, using these funds to purchase a vehicle for my other granddaughter. Riley is a direct violation of my wishes and a betrayal of the trust I placed in my son. It is my express instruction that Eleanor be made whole. She paused, her eyes glistening. "And to my family. If you are watching this, it means you forced Ellie to fight for what was hers. Shame on you. Ellie has carried the weight of this family's expectations for too long. I am changing the locks. She doesn't have to carry you anymore." She signaled for Brenda to stop the recording. "Make sure Nolan gets that," Margaret whispered, sinking back into the pillows, her energy spent. "Make sure he keeps it safe." Brenda nodded, her own eyes wide. She had seen family drama before, but the clarity of Margaret's fury was something else. "I will take it to him personally." "Mrs. Lane, good," Margaret breathed. "Now, turn off the light. I need to think." That evening, I was sitting in my living room when my email pinged. It was from Nolan. Subject: Bank update. Next steps. "Dear Ms. Hayes, Brookridge Community Bank has responded to our formal demand. They have admitted that the transaction authorization was irregular. They are willing to reverse the transaction to avoid a regulatory audit. However, simply reversing the transaction is complicated because the funds have already been paid to the car dealership. The money is gone. The bank is proposing to credit your account from their insurance fund, but they will then pursue your parents for the debt. This means your parents will owe the bank $25,000 immediately. If they cannot pay, the bank will sue them and likely seize the collateral, the car. Additionally, I have drafted the petition to remove Carl as executor. We will file it with the probate court tomorrow morning. Hold fast. Ellie, the truth is on your side." I closed the laptop. It was happening. The gears of the world were turning, grinding forward. My parents were about to owe a bank money they didn't have, for a car they didn't own, to replace money they had stolen from me. I walked to the window and looked out at the streetlights. I thought about calling them. I thought about warning them. But then I remembered the Family Financial Update PDF. Do not merge with household funds. I remembered the look on Dad's face when he said, "Your grandpa's money finally did something useful." I didn't pick up the phone. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. For the first time in a week, my hands weren't shaking. The conference room at Harborview Legal Group was designed to intimidate. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray skyline of Brookridge, a long mahogany table that shone like a dark mirror, and chairs that cost more than my monthly rent. I sat on one side of the table, next to Nolan Price. On the other side sat my parents and Riley. The air in the room was so thick with tension it felt difficult to breathe. My mother, Denise, was shredding a tissue in her lap, her eyes rimmed with red. My father, Carl, was sitting with his arms crossed, his jaw set in a line of stubborn defiance. Riley was slumping in her chair, scrolling on her phone under the table, clearly annoyed that she had been dragged out of bed before noon. Nolan cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel striking wood. "Thank you all for coming," he said. His voice was calm, lacking any warmth. "We are here to discuss the administration of Margaret Lane's affairs and a specific transaction concerning Eleanor Hayes." Dad leaned forward. "Look, Nolan, we have known you for 20 years. Can we cut the formalities? We are all family here. This is a family dispute. It is a legal dispute. Carl," Nolan corrected him gently but firmly, "and because I represent Margaret Lane, and by extension her estate, I must address the facts as they stand under the law." He opened a file folder, He didn't look at them. He looked at the papers. Fact 1. Nolan said, the account ending in 442 at Brookridge Community Bank was designated by deed of gift to Eleanor Hayes. The beneficiary designation is absolute. Fact 2. He continued, flipping a page. On Tuesday of last week, the entire balance of $24,857 was withdrawn via cashier's check. Fact 3. The withdrawal was authorized using a power of attorney document dated 4 years ago. This document was drafted by my office. It is a medical power of attorney, granting decision-making power only in the event of Eleanor's physical incapacitation. It explicitly does not grant financial authority. Nolan looked up, taking off his reading glasses. Using a medical instrument to access financial assets is not a loophole. Carl, it is fraud, and because the bank processed it in error, they are currently exposed. When banks are exposed, they tend to look for people to blame. Right now, that person is you. Dad slammed his hand on the table. It made Mom jump. It was a misunderstanding, he shouted. His face turned a deep, alarming shade of red. The teller knew who I was. I told her it was for family business. I did not trick anyone. You presented an invalid document to access funds that did not belong to you. Nolan said, intentions do not rewrite the statute. Carl, oh, come on. Dad gestured wildly toward me. Ellie is sitting right there. She is fine. She is letting you talk to her parents like we are criminals. Ellie, tell him. Tell him to stop this nonsense. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had driven me to college. I saw fear behind his anger, but I also saw the absolute refusal to admit he was wrong. I can't. Dad, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. You took the money. You didn't ask. You took it. You are dragging outsiders into family business, he yelled. This is between us. We could have settled this at the dinner table. We tried that, I said. You told me I was selfish for wanting it back. Mom let out a sob. We only wanted to help Riley, she cried. Her voice was high and thin. She was so unhappy. Ellie, she was stuck. We just wanted to give her a push. We always planned to make it right someday. Someday? Nolan asked. When is someday, Denise? When the market turns. When you retire? The law does not operate on someday. It operates on today. Riley looked up from her phone. She looked between Dad's purple face and Mom's tears. Wait, she said. Her voice was small. Is this about the car? Yes. Riley, Nolan said. It is about the car. But it is my car, she said, sounding confused. You gave it to me. We bought it for you. Honey, Mom said, reaching for Riley's hand. We used a different account to pay for it. You used Ellie's money? Riley asked. She looked at me, genuine shock on her face. Like, specifically Ellie's? Yes, I said. Riley frowned. That is weird. Why didn't you just use your own money? Because we don't have it, Dad snapped. He looked immediately regretful, but the truth was out. Nolan raised a hand to stop the bickering. There is another matter, he said. He pulled a second document from the folder. It was thick, stapled at the corner. Margaret contacted me on Sunday night. Nolan said, she is fully aware of the situation. She is deeply possessed of her faculties, and she has instructed me to execute an immediate change to her estate planning. Dad went still. What change? Effective this morning, Nolan said, sliding the document across the mahogany table toward my father. I have filed a petition with the probate court to remove Carl Hayes as the executor of the Margaret Lane estate. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting had been. Dad stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. You can't do that, he whispered. I have been the executor for 10 years. I am her son. You are under investigation for financial mismanagement of a beneficiary's assets. Nolan said, that automatically disqualifies you from serving as a fiduciary for the estate. Margaret has appointed a new executor. Dad looked up, his eyes wide. Who? Who did she pick? Aunt Sarah? No, Nolan said. He turned his head and looked at me. She picked Eleanor. I felt the blood rush to my face. I hadn't known. Nolan hadn't told me this part. Me? I breathed. Dad looked at me. The look wasn't pride. It was horror. Her? He sputtered. She is 32. She doesn't know anything about. She is a receptionist. She is an intake coordinator, Nolan corrected, and she is the only member of this family whom Margaret currently trusts not to loot the accounts. Riley let out a sharp gasp. Wait, if Ellie is in charge, does that mean she controls the money? Like, all the money? Nolan nodded. Pending court approval. Eleanor will have sole discretion over the distribution of assets, the sale of property, and the payment of debts, including the debt you now owe to the estate for the unauthorized withdrawal. Dad stood up. His chair fell backward with a crash. This is manipulation, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Nolan. You talked her into this. She is sick. She doesn't know what she is doing. I will contest this. I will sue you for malpractice. You can try, Nolan said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. But I have a video deposition from Margaret recorded yesterday. She is very clear. Carl, and if you challenge her, she has instructed me to enforce the no contest clause. You know what that means. Dad went pale. He knew. It meant if he fought the will and lost, he got nothing. 0. Meeting adjourned. Nolan said, closing the folder. I walked out of the building first. The cold air hit my face, drying the sweat on my forehead. I felt lightheaded. Executor. Grandma had made me executor. She had handed me the keys to the kingdom and a loaded gun. My parents and Riley stumbled out a minute later. They looked like they had been in a car wreck. Ellie? It was Dad. He marched up to me on the sidewalk, ignoring the people walking by. Fix this, he hissed. Go back in there and tell Nolan you decline. Tell him you don't want to do it. I can't do that. Dad, I said. It is what Grandma wants. She is confused, Dad insisted. And you? You are letting money come between family. You are destroying us over a bank account. How can you be so cold? I looked at him. I looked at Mom, who was weeping silently into a handkerchief. I looked at Riley, who was staring at her car in the parking lot like she was saying goodbye to a lover. I am not the one who destroyed us, I said. I stepped closer to him. I saw the lines in his face, the gray in his stubble. I saw a man who had been running from reality for years. You did that, I said, my voice shaking with the force of my suppressed anger. You did that when you chose my entire future as a down payment on a car. You looked at my safety net, at the one thing that made me feel safe in this world, and you saw a toy for Riley. Ellie, please, Mom begged. We can work this out. We are working it out, I said. In court. I turned and walked to my Honda. I didn't look back. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal maneuvering. Nolan called me the next afternoon. I have spoken with the bank's legal counsel, he said. We have agreed to a temporary standstill. They are marking the transaction as under dispute. This means they won't accidentally report it to the credit bureaus as your debt, and they are freezing the funds on the dealership's end if the check hasn't fully cleared, though it likely has. What does that mean for my parents? I asked. It means the bank is building a file, Nolan said. The compliance officer I spoke to was unhappy. Banks hate it when their own internal controls fail. They hate it even more when it involves a vulnerable elderly person's designated funds. He hinted that if we don't resolve this civilly, meaning if your parents don't pay it back, they are obligated to file a suspicious activity report with the federal government. That could trigger a criminal investigation by the district attorney. I felt a knot in my stomach. Jail. Do they know that? I asked. They do now, Nolan said. I sent a letter to your father outlining the exposure. I imagine the reality is starting to set in. The reality set in on Wednesday evening. There was a knock on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole. It was Mom. She was alone. She was wearing a raincoat, even though it wasn't raining. She looked small. I opened the door. Ellie, she said, can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped back. Come in. She walked into my tiny living room. She looked around at my mismatched furniture, my thrift store rug. I wondered what she saw. Did she see independence? Or did she see poverty that she had decided was fine? She sat on the edge of the sofa. She didn't take off her coat. "Dad doesn't know I am here," she said. "Okay, Ellie, you have to stop this." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "You have to tell Nolan to drop the inquiry." "I can't. Mom, Grandma started it. You can influence her. You are the favorite now. You are the executor." Mom's voice rose, desperate. "If this continues, if the bank comes after us, we lose everything. You have the house," I said. "You have Dad's retirement. You can take out a loan to pay back the $25,000. It will suck, but you won't lose everything." Mom let out a shuddering breath. She looked down at her hands. "No, Ellie, you don't understand." "What don't I understand?" "There is no retirement," she whispered. I stared at her. "What? And the house?" She paused, fighting tears. "The house is mortgaged to the hilt. Dad took out a home equity line of credit 3 years ago. We maxed it out." "Why?" I asked, stunned. "Dad makes good money. Where did it go?" Mom waved her hand vaguely. "Keeping up appearances, the club membership, the trips, helping Riley, the credit cards. The interest rates just kept going up. We are drowning. Ellie, we have been drowning for years." I sat down on the chair opposite her. The pieces were clicking into place. The desperation, the refusal to talk about money, the intense pressure to keep Riley happy because Riley was the shiny object that distracted them from the rot underneath. "So taking my inheritance," I said slowly. "It was the only cash we could access." Mom admitted. She started to cry in earnest now. We thought if we bought the car, Riley would get this job, and maybe she could move out, and that would lower our expenses. We were robbing Peter to pay Paul, but we never meant to hurt you. You sacrificed me." I said. My voice was dull. "You sacrificed me to keep your sinking ship afloat for 1 more month." "We were scared," Mom sobbed. "We are 60 years old and we have nothing, Ellie. And now, if the estate cuts us off, if Dad isn't executor, we have no way to pay the debts. We will lose the house." I looked at my mother. I felt pity, deep and aching, but I also felt a surge of self-preservation. "If I stop this," I asked, "if I let you keep the money, what happens to me?" Mom looked at me. She didn't have an answer. "Exactly," I said. "I go back to zero. I stay in this apartment. I don't go to grad school. I pay for your mistakes." Again, Mom stood up. She wiped her face. "You are so hard," she said. "When did you get so hard?" "When I realized I was the only one looking out for me." I said. She left. She didn't apologize. She just left me with the weight of their failure. I went to the hospice the next day. I needed to see the one person who wasn't drowning. Margaret was worse. The decline was visible now, hour by hour. Her skin was translucent, her breathing a shallow rattle. I sat by her bed. I told her everything. I told her about the meeting. I told her about Mom's visit. I told her about the debts and the second mortgage. Grandma listened. Her eyes closed. "They are broke." "Grandma," I said softly, "they did it because they are broke." Margaret opened her eyes. "They are broke because they never learned to say no." She whispered, "To themselves, or to your sister. I feel guilty." I admitted, "If I push this, they lose the house." Margaret turned her head. It was a slow, painful movement. "Ellie," she wheezed, "if you do not push this, do you think they will learn?" "No." "Do you think they will pay you back?" "No." "Then you are not saving them," she said. "You are just enabling them, just like I did." She coughed, a wet, rattling sound that terrified me. The nurse, Maria, stepped in to check the monitors. "I have to go," I said, standing up. "I don't want to tire you out." Margaret grabbed my wrist. Her grip was weak. Barely a flutter. "There is more," she whispered. "More?" "More in motion," she said. "Nolan knows. Trust yourself." "Ellie," I kissed her forehead. It was cold. That night, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I listened to it. "Hi, Ms. Hayes. This is Brenda, the social worker at Westlake. Your grandmother asked me to send this to you. She insisted it be recorded just in case she well. Just in case." Then, there was a click, and the sound of the room tone changed. It was Grandma's voice. Stronger than today, maybe from yesterday. "Ellie, it is Grandma. I know you. I know you are sitting there right now feeling like a villain. I know your mother has probably been by to cry and tell you about how hard their life is. Do not listen. Being kind does not mean you let people step on your neck. You have a good heart, Eleanor, but a good heart without boundaries is just a target. Your parents have spent 30 years teaching you that your role is to absorb their shocks. I am telling you that your role is to live your own life. If Carl tries to guilt trip you, if he tells you that family comes first, you remind him that you are family too. You matter too. I am proud of you. Ellie, stand firm." The recording ended. I sat on my couch, the phone pressed to my chest, and wept. I wept for the grandmother I was losing. I wept for the parents I never really had. I was wavering. Before the call, I had been thinking about calling Nolan and asking if we could work out a payment plan. Something soft. Something that wouldn't ruin them. But then, an email arrived. From Nolan Price. Subject: Video statement. Margaret Lane Ellie. Per your grandmother's request, I am sharing the video statement she recorded for the probate court. She wanted you to see it before the hearing. I clicked the link. The video opened. Margaret was sitting up, looking into the camera. She looked fierce. "My name is Margaret Lane." I watched her outline the history of the money. I watched her describe how my grandfather had worked overtime shifts, ruining his knees, to put that money aside. Walter didn't save that money so Riley could have heated seats. Margaret said to the camera, "He saved it so Ellie could have a chance." She leaned forward. "To my son Carl, if you are watching this, you have disappointed me. You stole from your daughter. You broke the trust of this family. And now, you have to pay the bill." She looked at the lens. "Ellie, choose yourself, finally. Choose yourself." I closed the laptop. The indecision was gone. The guilt was gone. Grandma was right. They had spent my life teaching me to be the cushion they landed on. But cushions get crushed. I wasn't going to be crushed. Not this time. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning, while I was getting ready for work, Nolan called. "Good morning, Ellie," he said. "Good morning. Nolan, I have an update," he said. He sounded satisfied. "I just got off the phone with the attorney your parents hired, a man named Henderson." "They hired a lawyer?" I asked. "With what money?" "Likely a retainer on a credit card," Nolan said dryly. "But that is not the point. Henderson is a pragmatist. He has seen the documents. He has seen the bank's affidavit, and I sent him a copy of Margaret's video this morning." And he told your parents the truth. He told them that if this goes to court, they will lose. He told them that if the estate disputes the transaction, the fraud allegations will become public record. He told them their best option, their only option, is to settle. "What does a settlement look like?" I asked. "It means they surrender." Nolan said, "It means they agree to the removal of Carl as executor. They agree to your appointment, and they agree to a repayment plan for the car that is binding and backed by assets." Backed by assets? Yes. Effectively, they are going to have to sign over a portion of their future inheritance to you now, to cover the debt, and the car, well, the car becomes collateral. Collateral, I repeated. "If they miss a payment," Nolan said, "you take the car." I stood in my kitchen, holding my coffee cup. I thought about Riley cruising around in the Silver Bullet. I thought about Dad's pride. "Do it," I said. "Draw up the papers. We are drafting them now." Nolan said, "But Ellie, be ready. When they sign this, the bridge is going to burn. Let it burn." I said, "I am on the other side now." The call came at 4:30 in the morning. It was a time of day that I had come to dread, the hour when the world is silent enough for bad news to ring the loudest. I was already awake, lying in the tangle of my sheets, staring at the street lamp casting long skeletal shadows across my ceiling. When the phone buzzed on the nightstand, I didn't jump. I just felt a heavy, cold stone settle in the pit of my stomach. I picked it up. "Ms. Hayes?" It was Maria, the night nurse at Westlake. Her voice was soft, practiced in the art of breaking hearts gently. "I'm here. Maria, she's gone. Ellie, she passed peacefully about 10 minutes ago." I didn't cry immediately. It felt too big for tears. I just sat up, the room spinning slightly, and said, "I'm coming." The drive to the hospice was a blur of dark roads and red traffic lights that I sat at for too long, waiting for a change that didn't matter. The city of Brookridge was asleep, indifferent to the fact that the only person who had ever truly anchored me was gone. When I arrived, the room was quiet. The rhythmic mechanical whoosh of the oxygen concentrator was gone. The silence was absolute. Margaret Lane lay in the bed, her hands folded over the quilt. She looked smaller than she had yesterday, as if her spirit had taken up most of the space in her body and, without it, she was just a fragile shell. I sat in the chair, the same chair where I had confessed about the money, where she had grabbed my hand with that surprising, fierce grip, and I wept. I wept for her. I wept for the stories she would never tell me again. But mostly, I wept from a crushing, suffocating guilt. Our last weeks together hadn't been about love or memories. They had been about bank accounts, lawyers, and betrayal. I had brought a war to her deathbed. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Maria. She didn't die sad. "Ellie," Maria said softly. "She told me last night that she felt light. She said she finally cleaned the house." I looked at Maria, wiping my eyes. "Cleaned the house?" "She said she swept out the dust so you wouldn't have to breathe it." I looked back at Margaret. Even in death, she was protecting me. She hadn't just died. She had executed a final maneuver. She had set the board, moved her pieces, and left me in a position to win a game I never wanted to play. The funeral took place 3 days later at a small, non-denominational chapel on the edge of town. It was a gray, overcast day, the kind of Midwestern weather that feels like a wet wool blanket. The parking lot was full. Margaret had lived in Brookridge for 50 years. She had taught half the town's children in Sunday school and fed the other half during the layoffs at the auto plant in 2008. I stood by the entrance, greeting people I hadn't seen in a decade. My parents stood 10 feet away. We were like two repelling magnets. Mom was wearing a black dress that looked expensive, probably put on a credit card, and clutching a handkerchief. She looked shattered. Every time someone offered condolences, she would collapse a little, leaning into Dad. Dad was wearing his navy suit. He looked stiff, his face a mask of tragic dignity. He wouldn't look at me. When our eyes accidentally met across the lobby, he flinched and turned away to shake the hand of the pastor. Riley was there, wearing a black dress that was slightly too short for a funeral, looking uncomfortable and bored. She was checking her phone constantly. I saw her glance out the window toward the parking lot where the silver sedan was parked. She was terrified to leave it alone, as if a tow truck might materialize from the mist. We sat in the front row, me on the far left, then a gap of empty pew, then Riley, Mom, and Dad. The empty space between us screamed louder than any eulogy. Dad went up to the podium first. He unfolded a piece of paper. "My mother was a saint," he began. His voice wavered perfectly. "She was the backbone of this family. She taught us about generosity. She taught us that what we have is meant to be shared. She would give you the shirt off her back if you needed it." I stared at my hands. Generosity. Shared. He was rewriting her life to justify his theft. He was turning her legacy into a permission slip for his own entitlement. She loved us all equally. Dad continued, and she would want us to be together, supporting one another, not letting the small things of this world divide us. He looked pointedly at me when he said small things. He finished and sat down, dabbing his eyes. The congregation murmured sympathetically. They saw a grieving son. They didn't see a man who had forged his mother's signature to loot his daughter's future. Then it was my turn. I walked up the steps. The wood of the podium felt cool under my hands. I looked out at the sea of faces. I looked at my parents. My grandmother was not a saint. I said, my voice was clear. It didn't waver. A few people shifted in their seats. She was a survivor. She lived through poverty. She lived through loss. She knew the value of $1 because she knew what it felt like to have zero. I looked directly at Riley, then at my parents. Dad said she taught us about generosity, and she did. But the greatest lesson Margaret Lane ever taught me was that love is not about giving until you are empty. She taught me that boundaries are a form of love. She taught me that protecting your future is not selfishness. It is survival. And she taught me that sometimes. The most loving thing you can do is stop enabling the people who hurt you. The silence in the chapel was absolute. You could hear the hum of the heating vent. Dad was staring at me, his face turning a blotchy red. Mom looked like she was about to faint. She left everything on the field. I finished, and she left me with the strength to finish what she started. Rest in peace, Grandma. I walked down. I didn't sit back in the pew. I walked straight out the side door into the cold air. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Harborview Legal Group. The days in between were a vacuum. My parents didn't call. I didn't call them. The only communication was a curt email from Nolan Price confirming the time. Tuesday arrived with a driving rain. I parked my Honda in the garage and took the elevator up. When I entered the conference room, they were already there. It was the same seating arrangement as the confrontation. The parents and Riley on one side, me on the other. But the atmosphere had shifted. Before, there had been anger. Now, there was fear. Riley had her car keys on the table in front of her. She kept her hand over them, her fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the fob. Nolan walked in. He carried a thick binder. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. I am sorry for your loss, he said. Sitting down, Margaret was a remarkable woman. We are here to execute her final will and testament, as updated by the codicil she authorized 3 days before her death. He opened the binder. First, the specific bequests, Nolan said. He listed them. $5,000 to Westlake Hospice, $5,000 to the First Methodist Church, her antique jewelry collection to be divided between Eleanor and Riley, her collection of first edition mysteries to her friend, Mrs. Higgins. Dad was nodding along, looking impatient. He was waiting for the big numbers. He was waiting for the house, the investment accounts, the life insurance. Now, regarding the residuary estate, Nolan said, this includes the family home on Elm Street, the investment portfolio at Vanguard, and the property located at 402 Oak Street. Dad frowned. Oak Street? We don't own a property on Oak Street. Margaret did, Nolan said. She purchased a small duplex there 8 years ago using money she inherited from her sister. She rented it out through a management company. She kept it separate from the general family assets. He looked at me. She called it her rainy day brick and mortar. I felt a shock go through me. A duplex. She had owned a house the whole time and never told anyone. Nolan continued, per the terms of the will, the property at 402 Oak Street is bequeathed, free and clear of all liens, to Eleanor Hayes. What? Dad shouted. He half rose from his chair. That is, that property must be worth $200,000. Why does Ellie get a house? Because Margaret bought it for her, Nolan said calmly. She anticipated that Eleanor might need a place to live that was not dependent on anyone else. Dad slumped back, stunned. Mom put a hand to her mouth. And the rest? Dad asked, his voice tight. The main house? The investments? Nolan turned a page. Margaret has appointed Eleanor Hayes as the sole executor of her estate. We knew that, Dad snapped. You told us that last week. Get to the money. Nolan, as executor, Eleanor is responsible for distributing the remaining assets. Nolan said. However, there is a codicil, a specific instruction triggered by the events of the last 2 weeks. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It looked fresh. This is the misuse of funds clause. Nolan said, Margaret dictated this to me the morning after she learned about the car. He began to read. It is my instruction that any beneficiary who has been found to have misappropriated, borrowed without consent, or otherwise converted funds designated for another beneficiary shall have the value of those funds deducted from their share of my estate. Nolan looked up over his glasses. Furthermore, if the misappropriated funds are not returned to the rightful beneficiary within 30 days of my death, the offending party shall forfeit their right to any discretionary distributions from the estate's investment accounts. Dad went white. What does that mean? Mom whispered. It means, Nolan said, that you owe the estate, specifically Ellie's trust, $24,857, plus legal fees. We don't have it, Dad yelled. You know we don't have it. Then, Nolan said, his voice dropping to a harsh monotone, you forfeit your claim to the Vanguard account. The room went silent. The Vanguard account was their retirement. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to supplement their Social Security. It was the cushion they were banking on. You can't do that, Dad whispered. That is our retirement. You spent Ellie's retirement on a sedan, Nolan said. Margaret felt it was an equitable exchange. But there is more, Nolan added. He turned to Riley. Riley froze, her hand gripping the keys so hard her knuckles were white. The vehicle known as the 2026 silver sedan, purchased with the misappropriated funds, is hereby classified as an asset of the estate subject to a lien. Nolan read. No, Riley screamed. She jumped up. It is my car. You can't take my car. It was bought with stolen money. Riley, Nolan said, under the terms of the codicil, the car is considered collateral for the debt your parents owe. If Carl and Denise cannot repay the $25,000 to Ellie within 30 days, the executor, Ellie, is authorized to repossess the vehicle, sell it, and use the proceeds to recoup the loss. Riley whipped her head toward me. Her face was twisted in a mask of pure adolescent rage. You did this, she screamed. She pointed a trembling finger at me. You told her to do this. You are stealing my car. I didn't steal anything, I said, my voice shaking slightly but holding firm. I am just reading the receipt. Riley, you are ruining my life, she shrieked. She looked at Dad. Daddy, do something. Tell them they can't take it. Dad looked at me. His eyes were pleading. He looked old, defeated. Ellie, he croaked, please, we can't pay the money. You know we can't. And if we lose the investment account, we will be destitute. And if you take the car, Riley loses her job. You are burning the whole house down. I didn't answer. I looked at Nolan. Show them the video, I said. Nolan nodded. He swiveled a laptop around to face them and pressed play. Margaret's face filled the screen. She was wearing her pink bed jacket. She looked frail, but her eyes were like flint. Hello, Carl. Hello, Denise. Hello, Riley. My family stared at the screen, mesmerized by the voice of the woman they had just buried. If you are seeing this, it means you didn't fix it, Margaret said. Her voice was raspy but clear. It means you forced Ellie to come to this room and sit through a reading of my will while you sat there hoping to get paid. Mom let out a low whimper. I want to be clear. Margaret continued. Ellie didn't ask for this. I did this. I did this because for 30 years, I watched you ask Ellie to be the bigger person. I watched you ask her to understand. I watched you take her stability and use it to patch the holes in your own lives. On the screen. Margaret leaned closer to the camera. Carl, you stole from your daughter. You used a medical document to rob her. That is a betrayal I cannot forgive. And using my illness as a cover? That is cowardice. Dad flinched as if he had been slapped. So, here is the deal, Margaret said. Pay her back, or lose the inheritance. And Riley looked at the screen, tears streaming down her face. That car is not a gift, Margaret said sternly. It is a symbol of your sister's sacrifice. If your parents can't pay for it, give it back. Do not drive around in your sister's stolen future. Ellie, Margaret said, her expression softening. Stand firm, even if it hurts, even if they scream. Stand firm. You are the only one who can break this cycle. The screen went black. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Then the explosion happened. Riley picked up her purse and threw it at the wall. I hate you. She screamed at me. I hate you. You are stealing from the family. You are letting a piece of paper destroy our lives. I stood up. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table. I am not stealing from the family. Riley, I said. My voice was loud, cutting through her hysteria. I am refusing to let the family steal from me. There is a difference. Mom was sobbing into her hands. Oh God, what are we going to do? Carl, say something. Dad sat there. He was staring at the blank laptop screen. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting a coronation and found a guillotine. She knew. He whispered. He sounded terrified. She knew everything. Nolan closed the binder. The snap of the rings was like a gunshot. Here is the situation, Nolan said briskly. The codicil is valid. The executorship is valid. Ellie is in charge. He looked at my parents. You have 2 choices. Choice A. You find $25,000 in the next 30 days and pay it into the estate trust. If you do that, you keep the investment account and Riley keeps the car. Choice B. You fail to pay. Ellie takes the car, and the estate retains the investment account to cover the loss and punitive damages. But we can't get the money, Mom wailed. No one will lend to us. Then you face choice B, Nolan said unfeelingly. There is a third option, Nolan added. We go to a settlement hearing in probate court. We present this video and the bank records to a judge. The judge will ratify the will. And given the evidence of fraud, the judge might not be as lenient as the will. The judge could refer the matter to the prosecutor. Dad looked up. His eyes were hollow. No court, he said hoarsely. Then you need to work with the executor. Nolan said. He gestured to me. Dad looked at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the dismissive arrogance he usually held for me. I saw fear. I saw the realization that the power dynamic had permanently flipped. Ellie, he said. I looked at him. I felt a strange detachment. I loved him, somewhere deep down, but I didn't like him, and I certainly didn't trust him. We will follow the will. Dad, I said, you have 30 days. Figure it out. I picked up my purse and walked out. Riley screamed something after me. I think it was bitch, but the heavy door closed and cut it off. That night, I drove to 402 Oak Street. It was a working-class neighborhood, the kind with chain-link fences and tricycles in the driveways. The duplex was a sturdy brick building with a small porch and a big oak tree in the front yard. I had the keys Nolan had given me. I walked up the path. The leaves were wet from the rain. I unlocked the door to the right-hand unit, which was currently vacant. I stepped inside. It smelled of fresh paint and floor wax. It was small, much smaller than my parents' house. The living room was a square box. The kitchen had laminate counters and a white stove that looked 20 years old but clean. I walked through the rooms. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. This was mine. No mortgage, no landlord, no parents holding it over my head. Margaret had bought this. She had secretly funneled her own money, probably scrimping and saving, to buy this building years ago. She had hidden it from Dad because she knew he would try to leverage it. She had hidden it from me. I went into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. I ran my hand over the cool surface. I closed my eyes and imagined living here. I imagined moving my thrift store furniture in. I imagined painting the walls a color I liked, not rental beige. I imagined Sunday mornings with coffee, sitting on my own porch. Safe, that was the word. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't one paycheck away from disaster. I wasn't dependent on the whims of a family that saw me as an insurance policy. But as I stood there in the dark kitchen, the relief was mixed with a heavy, aching grief. I had a house. I had my future back, but the cost was sitting in a conference room downtown, screaming at me. I had blown up my family. I had exposed their lies and forced them to face the consequences. And in doing so, I had severed the bond. They would never forgive me. Riley would never forgive me for the car. Dad would never forgive me for the humiliation. Mom would never forgive me for not saving them. I slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I was alone. But then, I thought of Margaret's voice on the video. Stand firm. I wasn't alone. I had her. I had the truth. And I had the keys to my own front door. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of dust and freedom. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. A tow truck drove by, its yellow lights flashing. It wasn't coming for me. I checked my phone. I had a text from Nolan. Settlement hearing scheduled for next Friday. Your father's lawyer called. They want to make a deal regarding the car. Be ready, I typed back. I'm ready. I locked the door of my new house and walked out into the night. The air was cold, but it felt clean. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a smell I knew well from my years working intake at the clinic. The scent of people waiting for decisions that would alter the trajectory of their lives. I sat at the petitioner's table, my hands clasped on top of the smooth oak surface. I wore my best charcoal blazer and a white blouse, simple and neat. Next to me, Nolan Price arranged his files with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation, across the aisle. The air felt heavier. My father, Carl, sat hunched forward, his elbows on the table, staring at a water stain on the wood. My mother, Denise, looked fragile, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed, clutching a tissue like a lifeline. And Riley sat on the edge of her chair, vibrating with a mix of terror and defiance, her gaze darting around the room as if looking for an exit. Their attorney, a tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson, shuffled his papers and whispered something to Dad, who didn't respond. All rise. The bailiff announced. Judge Hargrove entered. She was a woman in her 60s with a face that suggested she had heard every excuse humanity had to offer, and believed none of them. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at us. We are here for the settlement hearing regarding the estate of Margaret Lane. Judge Hargrove said. Her voice was dry and authoritative. I have reviewed the petition to remove the executor and the motion to enforce the codicil. Mr. Price, you may proceed. Nolan stood up. He didn't use grand gestures. He simply laid out the truth, piece by paper piece. Your Honor. He began. The evidence shows a clear pattern of financial misappropriation. We have the original deed of gift designating the funds in account 442 solely to Eleanor Hayes. We have the bank records showing the withdrawal of $24,857 on January 14th. He held up the withdrawal slip. And we have the instrument used to effect that withdrawal. Nolan continued. A medical power of attorney, drafted 4 years ago for health decisions only, which was presented to the bank as a general financial authority. The judge frowned, making a note on her pad. Finally, Nolan said, placing a flash drive on the bench, we have the video deposition of the decedent, Margaret Lane, recorded 2 days prior to her death. The bailiff played the video on the courtroom monitors. The room went silent as Margaret's face appeared. Her voice, raspy but filled with that undeniable steel, filled the chamber. Carl, you stole from your daughter. You used a medical document to rob her. I watched my parents. Mom closed her eyes, tears leaking out. Dad stared at the screen, his jaw working, unable to look away from his mother's judgment. Pay her back, or lose the inheritance. The video ended. Judge Hargrove sat back, tapping her pen against her lips. The intent is exceptionally clear. The judge said. She looked at Mr. Henderson, counselor. How does your client respond? Mr. Henderson stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, my clients do not dispute that the funds were accessed. However, we argue that the context matters. Carl and Denise Hayes were acting under extreme financial duress and were motivated by a genuine concern for the safety of their youngest daughter. He gestured to Riley, who tried to look small and sympathetic. They viewed this as an internal family loan. Henderson continued, there was no malicious intent to defraud. To label this as criminal conduct or to enforce such punitive measures would be excessive and destructive to the family unit. They simply wanted to help their child. Judge Hargrove looked at my parents. "Mr. Henderson," the judge said, her voice sharp. "I see a lot of parents in this court. Many of them are desperate, but the law does not allow them to cannibalize the assets of one child to subsidize the other. Financial stress is not a license for conversion of funds." Before Henderson could respond, the bailiff swore in a witness Nolan had subpoenaed. "Mr. Vance, the compliance officer from Brook Ridge Community Bank. Mr. Vance looked nervous. He was a man who preferred spreadsheets to witness stands. "Mr. Vance," Judge Hargrove asked, "did the bank authorize this withdrawal?" "We did, Your Honor," Vance said, his voice tight. "However, upon review, we acknowledge that the power of attorney was applied incorrectly by our branch staff. We processed the transaction in good faith, but we have since flagged the account." "And the status of the account now?" Nolan asked. "It is frozen," Vance said. "And per the bank's risk protocol, we have placed a hold on all other accounts where Carl Hayes is a signatory, pending the resolution of this dispute. We support the estate's motion to resolve this via the codicil." I saw Dad's shoulders slump. The bank had locked him out. He had no access to whatever scraps of money were left. Judge Hargrove nodded and turned to the family. "The court finds that the codicil is valid and enforceable," she ruled. "The intent of the testatrix is unambiguous." She looked at Dad. "Mr. Hayes, you have two options. Option A is immediate repayment. You will deposit the full sum of $24,857 plus statutory interest into the trust controlled by the new executor, Eleanor Hayes, within 7 days. Dad shook his head slightly, looking down at his lap. "If you cannot do that," the judge continued, "we proceed to option B. You will consent to a lien on the vehicle purchased with the funds. The vehicle will be surrendered to the estate to be sold. Furthermore, the portion of the estate's residuary assets that would have flowed to you, specifically the Vanguard investment account, will be reallocated to Eleanor Hayes to satisfy the debt and the punitive damages outlined in the codicil." The judge paused, letting the weight of the sentence settle in the room. "Mr. Henderson, confer with your clients." The lawyer leaned over. I could hear the frantic whispering. "We can't pay it," Mom hissed. "We don't have the cash." "Robert, you know we don't. Then you have to surrender the asset." Henderson whispered back. "You have no leverage here. Carl, if you fight this and lose, the judge could refer this to the district attorney for fraud. You could lose the house." Dad looked up. He looked at me. His eyes were red, filled with a mix of anger and pleading. He wanted me to stop it. He wanted me to jump up and say, "It is okay. I will fix it." I sat still. I kept my hands clasped. I breathed in and out. "Stand firm," Margaret had said. "We agree to option B," Dad whispered. His voice was broken. Riley let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "No," she cried out. "You can't." "Ms. Hayes," silence. The judge warned. "We agreed to the lien," Henderson said, standing up. "And the surrender of the estate share." Judge Hargrove nodded. "So ordered. The court formally removes Carl Hayes as executor and appoints Eleanor Hayes. The vehicle is effectively property of the estate as of this moment." She stacked her papers and then stopped. She looked directly at me. "Ms. Hayes," she said. I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." "The law can settle debts," the judge said, her expression softening for the first time. "But it cannot heal families. Enforcing boundaries against the people you love is the hardest thing a person can do. You have acted with integrity today. I hope you find peace in that, even if you do not find it at the dinner table." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. We walked out of the courtroom into the blinding gray light of the afternoon. The settlement terms were immediate, because the car was now estate property and a lien was active. The court had ordered it secured. A tow truck was already waiting at the curb. It was a flatbed, its engine rumbling with a low, impatient growl. The driver, a man in a neon vest, was holding a clipboard. Riley stopped on the sidewalk. She stared at the truck, then at her car parked 10 feet away. "No," she moaned. She looked at Dad. "Daddy, stop him. Please. It is my car. I have a date tonight. I have work tomorrow. I can't." "Honey," Dad said. He sounded hollowed out. "It is out of my hands." The driver walked up to us. "Estate of Margaret Lane?" he asked, looking at Nolan. "That is correct," Nolan said. He handed the driver a copy of the court order. The driver nodded and walked toward the silver sedan. He began to hook the chains onto the undercarriage. The metallic clank-clank was the only sound on the street. Riley fell apart. It wasn't a tantrum this time. It was the devastating realization that the world did not care about her wants. She slumped against Mom, sobbing into her shoulder. "He is taking it," Riley wailed. "He is taking my life. He is securing the asset." Nolan said quietly, "If the debt is not settled within the week, it goes to auction." I stood apart from them, watching. I felt a pang of sickness in my stomach. I hated seeing my sister cry. I hated the humiliation radiating off my parents. But I also remembered the empty bank account. I remembered the power of attorney. I remembered "you will understand one day." I did understand. Finally. The driver finished securing the car. He pulled the lever, and the silver sedan, the silver bullet, the symbol of my family's choice to cannibalize me, began to tilt upward onto the bed of the truck. Dad stepped away from Mom and Riley. He walked over to me. He looked older than I had ever seen him. The swagger was gone. The certainty was gone. "Are you happy?" he asked. His voice was rough. "No. Dad," I said, "I am not happy. This is a tragedy." "We were trying to help," he said. He rubbed his face with a shaking hand. "I know. I know we went too far with the paperwork. I admit that. But we were just trying to help your sister. We thought you could handle it. You are so strong." "Ellie, we thought you could take the hit." I looked at him. That was it. That was the core of it. They punished me because I was strong. They robbed me because I was competent. I am done. "Dad," I said, "done with what?" "I am done being the one who carries the guilt for everyone." I said, "I am done being the insurance policy you cash in when you make bad decisions." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stated it like a fact. Like the weather. "I don't forgive you." I said, "Not yet. Maybe not for a long time." Dad flinched. "But I am not going to destroy you, either." I continued. "I am going to manage Grandma's estate the way she asked me to. I will pay the debts. I will follow the law. The rest is up to you." I turned away from him. "Ellie, wait," he called out. I walked over to Nolan, who was waiting by his car. "Ready?" Nolan asked. "Ready," I said. The final scene of the day found me at 402 Oak Street. The rain had started again, a slow, cleansing drizzle that made the pavement shine. A small moving van was parked in the driveway of the duplex. The back was open, revealing the boxes of my life, my books, my winter coats, the mismatched dishes I had bought at Goodwill. I stood on the porch, holding the keys to my own front door. It wasn't a mansion. The paint on the railing was chipping slightly, and the screen door creaked, but it was solid. It was paid for. It was mine. Across the street, the tow truck had stopped at the intersection. It must have followed us from downtown, or perhaps the driver was checking his GPS. I watched as the light turned green. The truck groaned into motion. The silver sedan swaying slightly on the flatbed. Riley's car. My inheritance. My grandfather's sweat and my grandmother's promise. All wrapped up in metal and rubber. Being hauled away to pay a debt that never should have existed. I watched it until it turned the corner and disappeared. I felt a lightness in my chest. It was terrifying. This lightness, it was the feeling of having no safety net but the one you build yourself. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a photo I had taken years ago. Mom and me at a picnic, both of us smiling. Before the money, before the secrets, incoming call. Mom. I stared at the screen. I could answer. I could listen to her cry. I could listen to her beg me to stop the auction, to find a loophole, to fix it one last time. I thumbed the volume button on the side of the phone. The ringing silenced. I didn't decline the call. I just let it ring into the void. I put the phone back in my pocket. I turned to the door, slid the key into the lock, and felt the tumblers click. It was a heavy, satisfying sound. I pushed the door open and stepped into the quiet of my new life. Thank you for listening to My Parents Used My Inheritance to Buy My Sister a Car. Grandma made one call from hospice. I hope you enjoyed this story of betrayal, justice, and the hard cost of boundaries. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below and tell me your country or city. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more emotional, realistic dramas about family, justice, and turning the tables. And I want to hear your thoughts. Did Ellie do the right thing by letting the car be repossessed? Or was she too hard on her family? Let me know in the comments in English.